Good morning, I'm WaywornWyrm, and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about the phrase, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, and why I think its use is useless. The crux of my argument is the way it is used is as a thought-terminating cliche. Now, a thought-terminating cliche is generally a phrase that is used to... Its usage is to intend to dismiss dissent or justify some sort of logical fallacy. The phrase first appeared in Robert J. Lifton's 1961 book, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, where he was describing the structure of language used by the Communist Party of China, and he defined the term as the start and finish of any ideological analysis. Charles Buffet's book, Alcoholics Anonymous, Cult or Cure, published in 1997, slightly expanded that phrase, and he defined it as a thought-stopping phrase or phrases that include any use of language, especially repeated phrases, to ward off forbidden thoughts. Then in 2017, Robert Bennett described the term in his book Logically Fallacious as a substitute for a person's actual opinion or argument with a distorted, exaggerated, or misrepresented version of the position of the argument. Basically, person 1 makes claim Y sounds catchy, therefore claim Y is true. And it's really that last one that I think the phrase there is no ethical consumption of capitalism falls under. But just for a little bit more of an idea, some general examples that don't fit any specific arguments would be things like, that's just your opinion, here we go again, it's all good, it is what it is, now's not the time, or let's agree to disagree. Now, as you'll notice with most of those, that if you attempt to continue the argument after such a phrase is used, you end up kind of looking like an asshole. And so that's just kind of the point. It's a phrase that will end an argument. There's a lot of specifics, but those are some general examples. Now, the thing with there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, generally it is used when talking about the exploitation of workers and or the environment. And just the fact that capitalism, it's the idea that capitalism will always exploit people and the environment. And there's a lot we can say about the environment, but especially that part of the argument started picking up ground in the 1990s. And they now argue that a lot of people have gone green or have been recycling or gone vegan as part of making strides to better the lessen the impact, their impact on the environment, and not much has changed. I'd argue that, well, companies are horrible at pollution. Don't get me wrong. Like, I don't think individual change, even if every individual decides to go for the most extreme changes they can, I don't think that's going to solve any environmental issues or anything like that. That's a whole giant argument, the environmental part of there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. So we're going to save that for another day. And we're going to focus on the worker exploitation. Now, the thing with the worker exploitation argument is, in my mind, the best argument toward about workers being exploited is talking about wage theft, where wage theft contributes more to theft and robbery than all other forms combined, especially here in the US. But that's not generally what they talk about. Generally what they talk about is wages. And here's where especially here, is where I run into the big problem about there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. It reduces everything down to a binary. Either you are ethical and do not consume under capitalism, or you are unethical and you consume under capitalism. Here in 2021, there is no way to survive and not consume under capitalism. There's just not. There's no place on earth where you can do that. Especially if you want to live anything resembling I don't want to use the word normal, but let's go with typical. The typical way of life in 2021. So your choices are die or be unethical. And there's no room for, well, this is less unethical than the other. Which you can flip that argument around as there's no more ethical. There's no closer to ethical. Everything is boiled down to unethical. And that's my real problem. That's my real problem with the usage of that phrase, is it wipes all nuance. And I think there's really 5 different stages that we can look at exploiting a worker. And while I'm not going to argue that any of them are ethical, I am definitely going to argue that some are more ethical than others. Down at the bottom would be exploitation level 1. And that is where let's say for all of these examples, you work for a company and every hour, without fail, you produce $50 of value for your company. Exploitation level 1 would be you make less than $1 a day. That could be 0, that could be 99 cents, anything in between. You make less than $1 a day. You are basically to literally a slave. That's super exploitative. That is unethical as can be. And then we're actually going to switch to exploitation level 5, which would be you make $50 an hour for your company. You add $50 of value to your company every hour, and they pay you $50 or more an hour. You personally are not exploited, but you're either exploiting the company, and the company will stop existing, or they are paying someone even less to give you that money. And I really struggled for a long time in the making of this video with the argument about exploitation level 5, because you could use that to argue that I think exploiting a worker is good, or I approve of bosses and capitalists and etc. So I thought about it, and I thought, what type of person would add so much value to a company, and the company would pay that much or more an hour? And it's basically executives and or high-level management, or at least some level of management. Some level of management and higher will make as much or more money than value that they produce for their company. And so what the company is going to do is the company is going to make up for that by paying some other worker less. So while the individual person who is at level 5 exploitation, well, they are not through payment exploited. Being paid at that level of exploitation does raise the level of exploitation as a whole. And we don't want to talk about individuals, because that's useless. We're talking about workers as a whole, and if someone is paid as much or more than they provide to a company, there is someone else who is being exploited even worse than they would be because of that, because the company has to make up that shortfall. Now, I think both of those are the most unethical, with level 1 being the most unethical, and level 5 probably being the second most. Then we have exploitation level 2, which is you are paid... You provide $50 of value an hour to your company, and you are paid what is legally mandated that you must be paid, or even above that, but you are not paid enough to have a livable wage where you are located. And basically what you have to do with that is you have to share. You have to get roommates, or another thing that I thought of, I've never seen or heard of this, but at least theoretically it could exist, something I will call grocery mates, where I don't have enough money to buy a loaf of bread, but if I provide someone else who also has not quite enough, and then they go to, say, Costco or Sam's Club or another such company, kind of a more bulk foods company, they might be able, with our money combined, to buy 2 loaves of bread at more of a wholesale price, which means that our money would cover that. And it doesn't have to be bread. It could be, I don't have enough for half a gallon of milk, but I need a half a gallon of milk. You don't have enough money for a half a gallon of milk, and you need that. We pool our money together and buy a gallon of milk, because the gallon of milk costs less than buying 2 half gallons of milk. I've never heard of anyone doing that, but it could exist. Then there's exploitation level 3. And exploitation level 3 and 4 are the ones that I would argue are the closest to ethical. And we can argue if it is or is not actually ethical, but if anything is, it is one of these two. Exploitation level 3 is you bring in $50 an hour to your company, and the company pays you a living wage for where you live, which will probably be between $20 and $30 an hour. So we're talking about 40 to 60% of the value you add every hour you get back, which, on one hand, you're making a livable wage. You can fully support yourself. And that's great. But on the other hand, your company is still taking roughly half of the value you add to them. And then exploitation level 5 would be you add $50 an hour to your company, and the company pays you $40 or $45. So they pay you 80 to 90% of your worth, and they take a little bit. I think that is the closest to ethical if we're just talking about wages paid. You're getting most of what you add, but you're not getting all of it. But also, your company doesn't have to be exploiting anyone else. Like, they could pay all of their employees 80 to 90% of the value that they bring into the company, and the company can survive. Obviously, the problem with this is how do you tell how much value a person adds to a company every hour? If let's say you and I make something, that's what we do. We make some tangible object that is sold. Like, we make it in a back room, and then we go out front and we personally sell it. Now, I could work 4 hours and make enough objects that what I made in that was loud. What I made every hour can be sold for $50. Whereas maybe you work for 4 hours. Hour 1 and 2, you make $10 worth of stuff. Hour 3, you make $170 worth of stuff. And hour 4, you make $10 worth of stuff. That still averages out to $50 an hour. But there is that obvious huge outlier. So do you disregard that outlier? Do you just average out the other hours where the person makes $10 an hour? Or let's say there's more complicated. Let's say we make something in the back, and then we hand it to people in the front, and they're the ones who sell it. How much value do they add? Let's remove that even farther. Or, no, we don't even have to do that yet. So we work in a workshop. There's a janitor who comes in every night and cleans the shop. Keeps it looking really nice. How much value does he add? How much value does the mechanic who keeps our tools in good condition? The ones that need to be sharp are sharp. The ones that need to be oiled are oiled. How much value does she add? What if we don't work at the place where it's sold? What if someone has to transport them? How much value do they add? So it's really hard to tell what level of exploitation someone is in. Granted, in most cases, in the US, with most jobs, it's level 2. It's exploitation level 2. But there are people who live in exploitation level 1. And does the existence of someone somewhere in the supply chain being at exploitation level 1, does that taint the entirety of the supply chain? If I've got one person at exploitation level 1 and then 50 stops past them for you to get your finished thing, and all of those 50 stops, that's exploitation level 2. Same thing, except the last 3 stops are exploitation level 3. Are those equally unethical? What if the last stop is exploitation level 4? So there's one stop that's, the first place is exploitation level 1. The next 46 are exploitation level 2. Then we have 3 exploitation level 3s and 1 exploitation level 4. Is that as unethical as the first idea, where there's 1 exploitation level 1 and then 50 levels of exploitation 2? Or are all of those equally as unethical as one stop? The person creates the entire thing and sells it to you directly, and they're exploitation level 1. Does that make it more unethical? Because every stop, every link of that chain is exploitation level 1. I think there's nuance there. And the phrase, "there's no ethical consumption under capitalism," as used when talked about exploitation of workers, strips all of that nuance away. That phrase would answer all of those hypotheticals with no. None of those are any less unethical or any closer to ethical than any of the others. I disagree with that personally. I'm not going to sit here and say that is ethical. I'm not going to say that it doesn't matter how many stops there are. If I'm not even going to say if every stop along the way is exploitation level 4, that is necessarily ethical. I think that's the best case scenario. I don't know if that actually exists in anywhere in reality. But I think that is closer. It's just some things to think about. I think there's a lot of nuance there. I think we can healthily debate, and we can come to we can come up with a plan. Maybe that plan is ending capitalism. Honestly, that's probably the correct answer. But we're not going to end capitalism tomorrow. We're not going to end capitalism next week. Until we do, we need to decide how we can live and how we can push toward a society we find ethical. We can make informed choices. Now, maybe you can't. Maybe you don't have the capital to make informed choices. Maybe you can only afford things where exploitation level 1 and exploitation level 2 are very high. I get that. I see you. you are doing the best you can. You are consuming because we live in a society where you must consume. And you can't afford to consume in any more ethical way. Next time, I might talk more about wage theft or something along those lines. But today was just how people use the phrase, "there's no ethical consumption under capitalism." Thank you everyone so much. Please do like, share, subscribe, etc. Because we live in a capitalist society. That is how I can hopefully consume more ethically.